Good evening. The world today moved one step closer to a multilateral trade framework. India and the United States reached an agreement on the contentious issue of public stockpiling of food grains. What is curious, though, is that the government is not revealing what brought about this deal. That'll be our top focus on the news tonight. Welcome to the show. As always, we start with the headlines. India is no longer a roadblock in implementing a multilateral trade mechanism as the government reaches a deal with the US on public stockpiling of food. In Chhattisgarh, the government gives in to pressure 2 days after a mass sterilization campaign goes horribly wrong, announces a judicial probe. The doctor in question is under arrest. The Congress party turns to Pandit Nehru for revival as the party marks his 125th birth anniversary. A combative Rahul Gandhi accuses Modi of being an angry man in charge of the country. It is a world record knock in one-day internationals. Rohit Sharma smashes a mind-boggling 264 in just 173 balls, becoming the only man in history to score 2 double hundreds in limited overs cricket. And after the fight against the Islamic State overshadowed the fight against Bashar al-Assad, US President Barack Obama is now indicating there could be a shift in America's strategy. And our top story on the news tonight. Commerce Minister Nirmala Sitharaman today said that India and the United States have sorted out their differences over the public stock holding for food security, which comes under the aegis of the WTO, which so far has been holding back a multilateral trade mechanism. Now, this resolution would pave the way for the implementation of a so-called trade facilitation agreement, which has been stalled for months now.
The standoff has finally ended. On Thursday, India signaled the WTO trade facilitation deal could now go ahead.
We are extremely happy that India and the United States of America have successfully resolved their differences relating to the issue of public stock holding for food security purposes in the WTO in a manner that addresses our concerns.
The trade facilitation deal was stalled because India wanted to keep a peace clause that protected its food procurements and food security concerns till the WTO struck a definitive deal. India's present proposal will now be reviewed by the WTO General Council next month.
We urge the WTO membership to take this forward in the General Council on behalf of the Ministerial Conference and pave the way to spurring the WTO to much more such successes.
The left, however, asked the government to reveal the terms it has agreed on the trade facilitation agreement.
We don't know what India has agreed to because the USA is very clear they want unbridled access to our agricultural markets.
In the December 2013 Bali conference, India expressed concerns that agreeing to trade protocols could compromise its food security plans. The WTO agreement removes trade barriers but caps food subsidies to 10% of total food grain production. India objected to the calculation of subsidies that took 1986 as the base year and completely ignored inflation and currency fluctuation. India agreed to the facilitation agreement in Bali only under the condition that developing nations will get interim relief and face no sanctions till 2017. The present agreement between India and US comes just before the G20 summit this month that will see the presence of both US President Barack Obama and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. WTO says the trade accord could add $1 trillion to global GDP and create 21 million jobs by cutting down red tape. However, it argues that if developing nations continue giving high prices to their farmers, it would be unfair for farmers in the other parts of the world. But with its Food Security Act, India has little scope to jeopardize its own food security. Reporting from Delhi, Kriti Mishra for Rajya Sabha Television.
And like I said at the top of the show, what was curious about that press conference by the Commerce Minister was that she did not give out details as to what brought about this deal. S.K. Sarkar is the chairman of the Economic Affairs Committee of PhD Chambers. He's now joining us live on the news tonight. So in the absence of concrete information, despite, as I understand, questions being asked of the minister as to how this deal was brought about, in the absence of concrete information, we can only speculate. So I want your thoughts on what could have possibly brought about this breakthrough, because why would the US suddenly give in to this peace clause, and that too, as I understand, without any kind of time frame restrictions?
Well, we could only guess. I mean, we could only surmise as to what must have happened, because WTO works on consensus. So obviously, unless all the members agree to a particular agreement, and in this case, the TFA, which is the Trade Facilitation Agreement, so we can't move forward. So that's why America, now what has America said? America says that what possibly America must have agreed to, and this is of course again in the, there's a little bit of guesswork involved over here, which is that indefinite peace clause on food security beyond 4 years is one of the clauses which has been agreed to. In the General Council of WTO, America is likely to support India, and all the members of WTO are not going to challenge the food security programs under the WTO dispute settlement procedures. So that's what we think we must have been agreed to. But there are certain areas where we need to be very, very careful. I mean, I would caution the Indian government on this, and that would, I mean, that's because I think the Uruguay round has not been very, very fair to us.
And list your concerns, 1, 2, 3. What would be your top 3 concerns as we get to know, hopefully in the next few days, the details of this deal? What would you be concerned about, your top 3 concerns, eventually when we get to know the contours of this deal?
Well, my first concern would be Article 18.4 of the WTO Agreement on Agriculture, which provides for which provides for prices at 86, 88 prices, unless and until there is an excessive inflation. Unfortunately, this excessive inflation has not been defined. And I think that's where the developing nations have lost out. What they need to insist on over here is that please give us a benchmark as to what is excessive inflation. Because if once you get that figure, you could sort out a lot of your figures, and you could be within the benchmark of 10% of the AMS, which is the requirement of WTO. Now, that's one. If you look at our subsidies, which are as a proportion of GDP, now this has increased from 1.19% in FY 2001 to 2.16 in FY 2014.
That's almost twice.
Almost twice, yes. Now, and at the same time, our GDP has grown. Today we are a $1.8 trillion economy. Now, if you look at the food, and food, fertilizer, and fuel out of the subsidy, then they make up about 95%. Now, when that kind of a situation happens, obviously you will be pressurized. Now, if you look at the report of the Agriculture Division of US FDA, now they say that your farmer support includes, possibly, that is what they are meaning, that possibly includes irrigation, flood control, NREGA, FCI procurement, with these factors. Now, if you look at these kind of items, you will find, I would say that irrigation can't distort trade. So, but you need to explain these things. You need to come forward. We haven't been very, very successful when we are before the international bodies, where we need to explain our stance and say that this is what we are.
And I want to get your closing thoughts because of the paucity of time. You mentioned inflation a little earlier in this discussion. At a time when global agro-commodity prices are falling, whether it's soybeans, whether it's edible oil, sunflower oil, groundnut, palm oil, even some dals are falling, and that, of course, is staple here in India. How does that fit in, this whole deal with the WTO and with the United States? How does that fit in the context of falling prices, particularly because all of this boils down to the minimum support price, doesn't it, in a way?
Well, if I can go back, what the world holds against India is the stockpiling. Now, what is stockpiling? They say, according to them, it amounts to paying farmers to produce food, which is likely to lead to food surpluses that will get disposed of in the world market. Now, coming back to what you said, was that if the prices are falling, so where do I get a chance to dispose them of? So I am a little handicapped over there, and that is something. I go back to what I have been saying from the beginning, that we need to explain to the countries of the world that we are not against the TFA, which is the Trade Facilitation Agreement, but you need to understand our issues, and we need to explain them properly also. and explain to them that this is how these are the Indian conditions, and please try and appreciate where we stand.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. S.K. Sarkar is from the Economic Affairs Committee of the PhD Chambers. Thanks for putting those issues into perspective for our viewers. Meanwhile, other stories that we're tracking on the news tonight. Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Raman Singh has now ordered a judicial probe into the botched-up sterilization drive, which claimed at least 13 lives. The main doctor who's accused in this case has been arrested. He's now put the blame on tainted drugs. The government has banned at least 6 of these drugs, suspecting them to be spurious.
Under attack over the botched-up sterilization surgeries, the Chhattisgarh government has ordered a judicial investigation. 14 women died in 2 government-run sterilization camps in the last 2 days, sparking widespread outrage. Even the United Nations expressed alarm over the tragedy. Chief Minister Raman Singh has assured strict action against those involved in the case.
जुडिशल इंक्वायरी करने के बारे में हमने निर्णय लिया है और आज हम चीफ जस्टिस साहब से बात करके और एक जुडिशल इंक्वायरी हमने आदेश जारी किया है। ये विषय आज नहीं है कि इस्तीफा देने से सब चीज का समाधान हो जाएगा।
Actions were taken. The surgeon accused of the botched-up surgeries was arrested. He put the blame on tainted drugs and claimed that he is being victimized. Others who've been suspended also echoed his views.
मेरे को इसे ठहराया जा रहा है कि हो सकता है ऊपर से प्रेशर हो और केवल मेरे को ही दोषी मान रहे हैं। मेरे साथ सीएमओ को दोषी माने, जितना जो धारा मेरे को लगाया गया है वो धारा सीएमओ को भी लगना चाहिए, डीएचओ को लगना चाहिए, जो सस्पेंड है डॉक्टर्स जो रायपुर के उनको सबको लगना चाहिए।
तो इसमें तो हमारा रोल ही नहीं है, मतलब हम लोग जिम्मेवार तो बिल्कुल ही नहीं है। जो दवाई बना के भेजा है वो जिम्मेवार है।
The state's Food and Drug Administration authorities have sealed a manufacturing unit which allegedly supplied substandard medicines administered to the victims. A team of doctors from Hyderabad's Apollo Hospital has been sent to treat those still hospitalized. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And it does raise a larger issue of why in our country sterilization is so heavily woman-centric. Maybe it's time to rethink our sterilization programs. Meanwhile, other news that we're tracking on the news tonight, 5 army personnel, and that includes 2 officers. They were sentenced today to life imprisonment in the Machil fake encounter case back in 2010. All the soldiers and officers involved had been found guilty of conspiracy, murder, as well as falsely describing the victims as terrorists. Now, this verdict comes 4 years after the killing sparked widespread protests in Jammu and Kashmir. The killing of the 3 Kashmiri boys was passed off as an anti-militancy operation by the army. The verdict has been hailed by political leaders, including the Chief Minister, Omar Abdullah, calling this a watershed moment.
इनको अपने वो बेटे याद आती है, रोज रोते हैं। हम बहुत खुश हुए हैं कि इनको उम्र कैद हुआ है।
The people who have been crying hoarse against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act on the plea that this act gives a blanket sanction and the army men are let loose and nobody is actually punished is a slap on their face. They should notice this. It is not the first time. Army in the past also has punished its guilty members.
Remembering another Kashmiri, tomorrow is the 125th birth anniversary of India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. For the Congress party, the event is coming at a time when it does seem to have lost a huge ideological battle to the BJP, but also the government led by Narendra Modi is now laying siege to the legacy of the Congress's own party icons, the likes of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. The various speeches of party leaders at a function in Delhi today reflected these as well as many challenges that the Congress faces before it has to reinvent itself.
At the event to mark the 125th birth anniversary of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Congress leadership was in full attendance, underscoring the fact that modern India owes its secular fabric solely to Nehru's commitment.
आज हमें इस संकल्प के साथ यहाँ से जाना है कि हम उन विचारधाराओं, उन संस्थाओं और उन व्यक्तियों का मुकाबला करेंगे जो नेहरू जी के दिए उदार भारत की इमारत को तहस नहस करना चाहते हैं।
While neither Congress President Sonia Gandhi nor Vice President Rahul Gandhi mentioned Narendra Modi, their speeches expressed the uneasiness of the party about the manner in which the government is interpreting the legacy of Nehru's colleagues and party icons Mahatma Gandhi and Vallabhbhai Patel.
एक तरफ घर की पुताई हो रही है, भैया सड़कों को साफ करो, सड़कों को साफ करो, फोटो अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल रही है, सब लोग सड़क साफ कर रहे हैं, और दूसरी तरफ जहर फैलाया जा रहा है.
Sonia described Nehru not only as the architect of modern India, but also the man who laid the foundation of India's advances in science.
उन्होंने वैज्ञानिक संस्थाओं की स्थापना की, जिनके बगैर आज हमारा चंद्रयान मार्स की परिक्रमा कहाँ संभव होती.
After its defeats in the Lok Sabha polls, the Congress seemed to be using the Nehru's birth anniversary as an occasion to rally round non-NDA parties. It has organized an international meet on 17th and 18th November, for which it has not invited Modi. Shyam Sundar's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
And we will have extensive coverage of Pandit Nehru's 125th birth anniversary here on Rajya Sabha TV tomorrow. Meanwhile, all the other stories that made the headlines from across the country in Nationwide. Shiv Sena MLAs met State Governor C. Vidyasagar Rao today to demand a fresh trust vote in the Maharashtra Assembly. They claim that the BJP violated the law by not going for a division of votes. On Wednesday, the BJP-led government won the floor test in the Assembly by a voice vote. The Aam Aadmi Party here in Delhi today released the first list of candidates, 22 of them for the upcoming Assembly elections. All former ministers in Arvind Kejriwal's 49-day government, and that includes the controversial Law Minister Somnath Bharati. They've all been retained. The list, though, curiously, does not mention Party Chief Kejriwal's name. Petrol and diesel prices were hiked by 1 rupee 50 paise a litre after the government raised excise duty on both these fuels. The bid is to try and mop up an additional revenue of about 13,000 crores. The fall in international oil prices had resulted in multiple reductions in both petrol and diesel prices since August. There's also a possibility of another round of cuts later this weekend, but the possible reduction has now been negated with this decision. All right, we're going to take a break here on the program. When we return, it's the last day of the Prime Minister's visit to Myanmar. Narendra Modi addresses the East Asia Summit and meets the premiers of Russia and China on the sidelines. The News Tonight is back right after this. Welcome back. This is the News Tonight. My name is Saka Jacob. Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrapped up his visit to Myanmar Thursday. He's now headed to Australia for the G20 summit. On Thursday, Prime Minister Modi pitched for an Act East policy during the one-day East Asia summit, on the sidelines of which he also met with Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang and Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Li Keqiang invited Modi to visit China for a bilateral summit next year. Later in the day, Modi also addressed the Indian community in Naypyidaw.
हम एक सैटेलाइट का निर्माण करके अवकाश में उस सैटेलाइट को भेजेंगे और वो पूरी तरह सार्क के लिए डेडिकेटेड होगा. और आज मैं जब म्यांमार में आया हूं तो मैं ये भी घोषणा करना चाहता हूं कि भारत का ये जो सैटेलाइट हम सार्क को डेडिकेट करने वाले हैं उसके सारे लाभ म्यांमार को भी देंगे.
Australia, meanwhile, is preparing for Prime Minister Modi's first visit to the country after taking charge. The Indian diaspora there is getting ready for a grand welcome. Modi will begin his Australia tour Friday. Apart from the G20 summit and bilateral meetings on the sidelines, Modi will also address the Indian community. It's going to be happening at the Allphones Arena in Sydney Monday, tickets for which have already been sold out. He will also meet with 200 prominent Indian businessmen and entrepreneurs, as well as students in Sydney.
The day the program was announced that Modi ji would be addressing Indian community in Sydney, it was completely like an electrifying enthusiasm among all Indian diaspora in Australia, not only in Sydney. It is also reflected by the tremendous number of registration that we got within 3 days. We got 21,000 registrations within 3 days. That reflects how much people love Modi ji. All
right, so another Madison Square Garden type event there being planned in Sydney. Meanwhile, other stories, Indian steel producers have written to the Steel Ministry asking to control the galloping imports from China. Now, these companies are seeking higher import tariffs to protect the interests of domestic players. At present, India levies between 2.5% and 10% excise on steel imports. The government has promised measures to counter these cheap imports, although Steel Minister Narendra Singh Tomar did not give a time frame. He said the issue will be resolved soon.
संतुलन बने इस दृष्टि से हमारा प्रयत्न है क्योंकि हम लोग हाई क्वालिटी स्टील बनाएंगे वो प्रोड्यूस कर पाएंगे तो प्रतिस्पर्धा में ठहरेंगे.
The deadly Ebola virus has now claimed over 5,000 lives. It's also making a return in Mali. The country, which was set to announce itself free of the virus, saw 3 more deaths and dozens quarantined.
The latest figures from the World Health Organization present a grim picture of the fight to contain the deadly Ebola virus. The death toll has surpassed 5,000 in the 8 affected countries, predominantly in Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea.
As of 9 November, 1,498 cases and 5,100 deaths were recorded in the affected Ebola countries.
The outbreak has resurfaced in Mali, which was thought to be free of the virus, with reports of 4 fresh cases. The death of a nurse in the country has prompted quarantine of more than 90 people. There are reports that the spread of the virus has slowed down. But both WHO and the United Nations caution that the fight against Ebola is still at a critical stage.
What I can tell you is we should stay still very vigilant because things tend to change very quickly in Ebola.
There are other parts of Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea where transmission is still fierce, where there are many new cases emerging each day.
Health officials are reassessing strategies to combat the spread in West Africa. Officials urge the US Congress to approve $6.2 billion in emergency funds to fight the disease. Clinical trials to find an effective treatment are also due to begin in West Africa next month. 2 experimental vaccines have already been fast-tracked into safety trials. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
From the fight against Ebola to the fight against the Islamic State, the US is now apparently reconsidering its war strategy, both in Syria as well as in Iraq. US President Barack Obama says he will seek fresh authorization from Congress in the next couple of weeks. US senators say the battle against the Islamic State needs to be widened to include the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria. Now, since Monday, America-led forces conducted 16 airstrikes, most of them in Syria, around the strategic town of Kobani. US senators quote Syrian rebels as saying that these strikes actually are weakening their fight against Assad while leaving the Islamic State unharmed.
To me, the lack of an Assad effort is something that's actually holding back additional momentum in Syria right now, because I believe the coalition partners will be much more forthcoming, Turkey being one, but all of them, if there was actually an Assad component today.
More international stories coming up in Global Buzz. In Pakistan, arrest warrants were issued Wednesday against cricketer-turned-politician Imran Khan and Islamist cleric Tahir ul Qadri. They were charged with leading an attack on Pakistan Television Corporation's headquarters. This was back in September when protests against Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif turned violent. Demonstrators had broken into the state-owned PTV headquarters. The mob then took over the control room, and in fact, transmission was taken off air for a short while. America's ambassador to the United Nations has accused Russia of fueling a war in Ukraine. Speaking at the UN Security Council meeting in New York, Samantha Power claimed that NATO has confirmed sightings of Russian military equipment as well as troops entering Ukraine in the last 48 hours. The US also says there's need for greater international pressure on Russia to abide by the 5th September ceasefire. Bombs exploded near the Egyptian as well as UAE embassies in Libyan capital Tripoli on Thursday. There were no immediate reports of any casualties. The blast followed a series of car bombs in the eastern city of Tobruk, where the internationally recognized government is based. The city is under threat from the rival government, which is based out of Tripoli. The robo-probe Philae, which made a historic comet landing, is now stable after initially failing to attach to the surface. The probe released an image of the comet from 3 kilometers away during its descent. Efforts are now being made to locate the position of the European Space Agency probe on the comet. Scientists are hoping that it will analyze the comet's surface to yield insights into the origins of our solar system. All right, we're going to take another break here in the news tonight. When we return, all the sports stories. And what a good day it's been for India's shuttlers at the China Open Super Series. Both Saina Nehwal and Parupalli Kashyap are now through to the quarterfinals. That and other sports stories when the news tonight returns. Welcome back. This is the news tonight. Sports news now. And Rohit Sharma scripted history at the Eden Gardens today by scoring a mind-boggling 264. This is against Sri Lanka in the fourth one-day. That's the highest individual score by anybody in one-day cricket. What's more, Rohit also became the first player to score 2 double hundreds in the limited format. India's imposing total of 404 was too much for the hapless Lankans to chase down.
दिशा में उन्होंने अपने स्ट्रोक्स के लिए 18 चौके और 3 छक्के इस बात के गवाह.
Just sitting up in the wicket, hit his pot.
It was a day when records were meant to be shattered. Returning to the squad after an injury in August, Rohit Sharma smashed his way into record books. He was even dropped very early in his innings. Since then, there was no looking back for Rohit Sharma. He took the Lankan bowlers to task for that early mistake by scoring his 5th 100 in as many balls, and then went on to score his second double 100 in the ODI format. He's the first player to achieve the feat twice, surpassing Sachin Tendulkar and Virender Sehwag. The highest individual score was not too far, and Rohit Sharma made sure he returned with his hands full. Launching boundaries and sixes regularly, he soon went past Sehwag's record of 219. His innings was so outrageous that the first 100 runs, which were hit at a runner ball, seemed like a humdrum in comparison to the 164 runs that followed. He finally ended with a score of 264 and 173 balls. He went in the last ball of the match. By then, India had reached 404 for 5. He was given a guard of honour when he walked off the Eden Gardens. Bureau Report, Sabha TV.
And in response, Sri Lanka had been bundled out for just 251. Just think about that for a moment. All 11 Sri Lankan players managing less than what one Rohit Sharma managed for India. More sports news and Sports Beat. It was a good day today for Indian shuttlers at the China Open Super Series. Saina Nehwal, Parupalli Kashyap and Kidambi Srikanth all entering the quarterfinals after posting contrasting victories in second-round matches. World number 5 Saina defeated Chin Chinbing of China 21-18, 21-18 in just 43 minutes. Both the male shuttlers, though, had to fight hard for their wins against Chinese opponents. Talk about easy wins. World number 1 Novak Djokovic produced a scintillating performance to beat Stan Wawrinka 6-3, 6-love in the ATP World Tour Finals. Djokovic lost the first 2 games, but he came back to win 12 of the next 13 games. He now tops Group A. He's unbeaten in 29 indoor matches, and he's never lost a game in the O2 Arena since 2011. Football's world governing body FIFA has cleared the 2022 World Cup host Qatar of corruption allegations, saying it's found no grounds for reopening the controversial bidding process, not just for the 2022 World Cup, but also for the 2018 one, which Russia will be hosting. FIFA did criticize the English Football Association for flouting bidding rules in its attempt to stage the 2018 World Cup. All right, so that settles that. And that settles this Thursday edition of the News Tonight. From me, Zaka Jacob, and the rest of the team. We'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Good night.